To improve my information retention abilities and to enhance my capacity to structure and organize the abundant amounts of information I'm scribbling down on a daily basis, I decided to dive into the topic of note-taking. Right note-taking practice can be extremely helpful in work, research, and in learning, and it enhances performing and achievement, as I've learned studying this material. And today I'm honored to be talking to Professor Kenneth Kiewra, who we could call potentially the world champion of note-taking. Kenneth is a professor in educational psychology at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and he's been studying note-taking for over 40 years. He has obtained his PhD in the year that I was born, 1982. So you've got quite a head start when it comes to note-taking, I think. And actually published a great many books, developed and validated the SOAR teaching and learning method, about which I'll be asking more shortly. And this method is shared with tens of thousands of teachers and students worldwide. And I think the insights with regard to note-taking with many, many more. Kenneth, thanks so much for being here with me today and taking part with the project. If I may, I'd like to start with a personal question, because from what I've learned about you and what I've read about you, you've been a devoted note taker almost your entire life. You've been named the Note Taker of the Year runner-up in college, and you've conducted many note-taking studies, of which 4 have been part of your dissertation. And by now, with over 40 years of experience and research in the topic of note-taking, what's your story? What's this interest, or maybe I should say obsession, with regard to note-taking?
Sure. Well, first off, thank you for having me, Julius. Well, the first thing I've got to admit is most of that was true, but one thing wasn't. Part of that is a joke. There was no Note-Taker of the Year competition, okay. And there was no runner-up position in that false competition. So that was just a little bad American humor.
Yeah, good.
But yes, the rest is true. So first off, when I was in college, I was not a good learner. I started off college definitely on the wrong foot. I wasn't going to classes. When I was going to classes, I wasn't paying much attention, and I really wasn't doing well until I found my way into an educational psychology class in college as I prepared to be a teacher. And it was there that I really started learning about learning and learning how to be a better learner myself. And it was great because the rest of my college career was nothing but A's. But one of the things we began to talk about in that course was the importance of note-taking, as it can help you to, pay attention, and it gives you a set of notes, of course, that you can review later on as you study for a test. But where my real interest in note-taking began was in graduate school at Florida State University. I was taking a course in my first semester there from my advisor. It was a statistics course. And the first day of class, he said, "All right, students, I want you to realize that you are not allowed to take notes in this course." And everybody was like, what? What do you mean no notes? Everybody always takes notes. And he said, "No, I think that when you're taking notes, you're not really listening. You're really not paying attention. You're really not processing the information. Your attention is disturbed and you're just trying to get down as much information as you can. And I don't want you to do that. I want you to listen, pay attention, and be part of this class. I want you to be engaged." Now, however, I do realize that you need a good set of notes to review later on. So I will supply you with one. At the end of each class, I'll give you a full set of notes. And with that, most of the class, applauded. "Oh, this is great. This is fantastic."
They lean back.
But not for me. I was a voracious note taker. And so the way I handled this was I retreated to the back of the classroom and I tucked in behind, an ex-Florida State offensive lineman who had let himself go. And I was, hiding in his shadow, and I became a clandestine note taker. And, it worked pretty well for a while, until one time the instructor, I was down there, taking notes in a little alcove, like this, and he must have come by. I didn't even know it. And all of a sudden he's behind me and he says, "Mr. Kiewra, what are you doing? Are you taking notes in my class?" And I had to think quickly. So, of course I lied. I said, no, I'm writing a note to a friend back home. And he looks down at my notes and he says, "Well, so nice of you to tell your friend about omnibus testing," which is a statistical thing.
Yeah.
So that's my story. But that's what led me to start investigating note-taking as a graduate student at Florida State. Yeah. My advisor, the statistics professor, actually helped me on those studies. He was my advisor. And during my time at Florida State, I actually conducted 6 note-taking studies to try to start to find out if my professor was correct, if note-taking was a problem. Yeah. And so that sort of got everything going. And that's sort of been my major research area over the years. It's branched into some other things, talent development, for example, but still to this day, I do investigate note-taking.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, maybe we'll I'm sure we'll get to this, because I wanted to ask, what were the key findings that you found, whether or not he was right or you were right? I mean, I actually know some of the answers because I've been going through your material, obviously, but yeah, I'm going to say a few words about this.
Yeah, I wish I had prepared a slide for that, because I do have one, but I'll tell you about one of the experiments. I've done many experiments on the prospect of instructors providing notes for students. So in one study, students came to class, and some of them were asked to just listen to the lesson. Some were asked to take notes, and some were asked to leave. And everybody, of course, wanted to be in that group. And then a day or so later, we reconvened, and people who had listened either had nothing to review, or they were given a set of notes prepared by the instructor to review. People who took notes either were not allowed to review, or were allowed to review their own notes, or they were given the instructor's notes to review. And the people that were absent either had nothing to review, or they were given the instructor's notes to review. The bottom line was this: what was most effective was people who reviewed the instructor's notes. It didn't matter whether they listened, whether they took notes, or they were absent from the lesson. If you had a good, complete set of notes to study, to review, you did best on the test. Yeah. And that's because, well, number one, people don't take very good notes when they take notes. They only record about 1/3 of important lesson information. Yeah. But most importantly, the learning doesn't so much go on during the lesson. It really goes on when you have more time to process the information, such as when you study, when you review. So if you have a good set of notes, that's the key. So my professor was kind of right that having a good set of notes would really be the key to learning. Now, on the other hand, not all faculty, not all professors are going to give people notes. When you go to a meeting, you may not get notes. So we also need to train people how to take better notes. Yeah, good point. That brings me to the next point, because actually there's this dichotomy of where we want to be present, as your teacher said, and be fully present and just have your attention with what's being said. And at the same time, we want to take as complete notes as possible for whatever information is shared. I personally take a lot of notes, and it helps me a lot with recollecting information, and also with further follow-up. For instance, I remember things when I write things down. Yeah. But also I feel that my note-taking oftentimes is incomplete, because I'm trying to do both things at the same time, trying to listen and trying to write these complete notes, at least to the level that I can. So what different levels are there when it comes to note-taking? And I know that you distinguish 4 levels, is it correct? Well, yes and no. Let me flip over to a slide here.
Sure.
So there's not necessarily 4 levels, but I would agree that there are levels. Yeah. And by levels, I mean, there's sort of the stuff that's more superordinate, more general. Yeah. And let's call that the main ideas, or let's call that level 1.
Yeah.
And my research has shown that students are really good at getting the level 1 ideas. For years, I had just sort of looked at how many notes students got, and I said, oh, students are really crummy note takers. They only record about 1/3 of important lesson ideas. But then when I started looking at the levels of ideas, I noticed something, and that was, well, they're really quite good at getting the main ideas. It's really the details and the examples that follow that the students are missing. So here's an example. If I said during a lesson, hey, students, note-taking increases achievement. That's sort of a main, overarching, superordinate idea.
Yeah.
Students are likely to record that.
Yeah.
But then if I follow and say, note-taking increases achievement through its process and product functions.
Yes.
Now, not as many students are copying or writing down that idea. And then if I go further, I'm talking about the process function now. The process function involves the activity of note-taking and is measured by comparing the achievement of note takers and listeners. And you can see the numbers in parentheses, the percentages, and that just sort of gives you an idea, a rough idea of what students are doing. When you give them something really superordinate like this, about 90% of them write it down. But as you get more subordinate, more detailed, they write less and less until, maybe they're only getting about 10% of something. But as I said, most of all, most lessons provide a lot of detail, a lot of elaboration. And I think the way to think of it is, by and large, students are only getting about 1/3 of important information.
Yeah.
So they're missing a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
So even people that think they're pretty complete note takers, they're probably not.
But then how do you do that? How can you stay focused? Because I know that if, for instance, you go into a meeting or you go into a lecture and you know the material already in advance, you can prepare for it, you can set out a structure. But if you have to listen both and take notes and create this structure, that's quite a lot to handle.
Sure. So one thing to think about is, we all know a little bit about the planets. So let's say there's a lesson on the 8 planets. This might be somebody's notes on the first 2 planets, and they're very complete. But look what they have. You asked about structure. It makes it very clear that there's 2 planets right here on this, in these notes right now. But look what we're doing. Rather than just putting down a bunch of details, we're designating where those details go, how they fit. So 36 million is how far it is from the sun in terms of miles. 3 months is the revolution time. So when a learner, when a note taker can ferret out, find these sorts of categories that are being discussed and designate those, and then put the details with the categories, the notes are going to be more comprehensive and better structured. So right away, we now know that for each of the planets, we're going to be talking about its surface, its moons, its rotation time, its orbit speed. So that's the kind of thing you really want to look for as you're listening in a meeting or in a lesson. What are the categories that are cutting across the various topics that are being discussed? And you want to use those as an organizing tool.
Yes.
Staying with the idea of what most students do, however, they may not use those categories. And again, they're going to just be missing a boatload of information. So the stuff in black here might indicate what the student has written in their notes or recorded in their notes, and the stuff in orange is what they've missed. So imagine studying these notes, 4, 5, 6 weeks later in preparation for a test. You're going to be in trouble. There's nothing here about the orbit speed of Mercury. There's nothing about the miles from the sun for Venus. But this is what 1/3 of notes look like. Yeah. And then even when you go back to these notes, so you have this note here, rocky. Well, what does it mean? Because you haven't designated its structure. You haven't indicated that that's the surface feature. So you're looking at that and you're going, now, what is that? Is that Rocky 1, Rocky 2, Rocky versus Drago? You're just totally confused. But what is this 8,000? So it's important to try to get complete notes, and it's also important to kind of structure your notes in the way I've done here.
But this happens to me a lot, actually. I scribble down information and it's all over the place. And then later I cannot always make sense of what I actually wrote down. So it's exactly like you said, that I have somewhere 8,000 or just Rocky, and the other context is missing.
Yes.
So what tips do you have for people? Again, here it's easy to know, if you know in advance what you'll be hearing about, and you can create some kind of structure. But what tips would you have for creating that structure on the go as you are in the process of note taking? And
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think first off, just kind of to hammer this point a little bit more, when most people take notes, they're writing down things they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So later on, when you go back to those notes, what are you looking at? A bunch of things you don't know.
Yeah.
They aren't tied to the things you know. There's no context. So I think and then think about it this way. What students and note takers are doing is they're sort of collecting these little seeds, these things they don't know, and they're throwing away the good part. They're throwing away the fruit. Later on, they return and they have these seeds and they don't know what those seeds are. And I think that's the problem with your note taking and those of others.
Yes.
So number one is you need to make your notes more complete. Don't just write down things you don't know. You wrote down a point. Do you have a definition of it? Do you have an example of it? Can you link it to other stuff that you already know about? Can you link it to other things being said? So learning and memory is really all about connections.
Yeah.
And a lot of people learn in a piecemeal fashion, one idea at a time, as if those ideas have no connection with other ideas.
Yeah.
It would be as if I dumped the pieces of a puzzle on the table in front of you and said, okay, what is it? And you said, well, this one is kind of an orange piece with some flecks of gray. And here we kind of have a brown one and it has some tan lines running through it. This one here, I mean, that would be silly. That's not how you would do a puzzle. You would put the pieces together and see the big picture. Oh, it's a map of the United States. Oh, it's a barn in the country, you know? And I think a lot of times learners don't go at learning in that way. They go at it in a piecemeal fashion, one idea at a time. So I think with note taking, we want to make the connections. We want to connect the pieces to one another. We want to connect the pieces to things we already know. And we certainly want to be writing down more than stuff we don't know.
Yeah, that was already an eye opener for me, what you just said, Kenneth, that we write down the things we don't know.
Yeah.
It's actually very true, and I do that a lot. And being aware of this is actually a huge point, because it reminds me next time, or it will remind me, to also take care of the context, the definitions, the examples, etc., and that will link it to what I already know. So that's indeed a great point.
Yeah, and here's something that will help you. Think about, you're going to leave this meeting or this class, and you need to teach, somebody is not there, and you need to tell this person entirely what happened and help them understand as if he or she were there.
Yeah.
So, you know, you wouldn't be taking the kind of notes you're taking now in order to do that. I've gone to conferences and taken notes on somebody's talk, for example, a 10-minute talk, and I might leave with 6 or 7 pages of notes because my purpose is a little different. I want to be able to tell others about this study. I want to be able to use this in my own teaching. I want to have a record of this. So I'm taking extremely complete notes very, very rapidly, which gets to another point, that it's hard to take notes because most lessons are presented at about 180, maybe 200 words per minute.
Yes.
I don't know how fast I'm talking now. I'm from New York, so probably pretty fast. But most people only type at about 30, 40 words per minute, and they probably only write at about 20 words per minute. So something's got to give. Exactly. And so I think we have to be selective in our note taking. We also have to be fast. We have to use abbreviations and notations to help us write faster. We have to say to somebody, hey, wait a minute, that's really important. Can you repeat that? Or can you tell me more about that so I can write it down? Yeah. You may want to record meetings and lessons so that you can go back to a point. You might, be keeping time on your notes so okay, this was 11 minutes in. So when you go back to your recording, you can get that missing information. So there's, little strategies like that to kind of make up for the time problems that we have as learners and note takers.
Yeah, that's all useful stuff. I'm proud to say I do some of that already. So that's encouraging. Yeah. Hey, as I learned from researching this topic, the revision of our notes is a very important part of note taking. I'm guilty of that, actually. I don't always revise my notes. Sometimes I go back to them, but I think the revising part is a very important suggestion. Could you tell me more about this process, why it's important, and how we can do so effectively?
Sure. Let me see where my notes were on that. Okay. Oh, I know where I want to go. Let's just keep this slide up right here. Or actually, let me just go back to this one. When people take notes, again, most of their notes are incomplete. But what students and note takers should probably do afterwards is look to revise their notes soon after the meeting or the lesson. And the reason for that is because memory is cue dependent. If I go back to a place that I haven't been in 5 years and I see the baseball field there, or I see a delicatessen there, those are cues that are going to bring back memories from the last time I was there 6 years ago. I'm going to remember, oh yeah, I bought that roast beef sandwich, and oh, I remember there was a wild softball game going on at that field. Yeah. So our memories work that way. They're cue dependent. So actually, let me go to this one. So what we could do after the lesson or after a meeting is we can look at our notes and try to use our existing notes to help us retrieve stuff we didn't write down. Yeah. So, I might have Rocky, and then I remember, oh, okay, that was the surface. So it helps me include that note that's the surface. And then I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. After that, what were they talking about? They were talking about moons. I've got nothing in my notes about moons. Yes, I remember they did talk about moons, and Mercury was an odd planet that had 0 moons. So let me add that to my notes. So we've done a couple studies now that show when students do revise their notes after a lesson, they can add quite a few new notes and have more notes at their disposal to study. Some of our studies have shown that it's good if instructors actually pause their lesson from time to time and let students revise occasionally throughout the lesson. So if people were listening to this and they wanted to take notes, they might be wise to pause it occasionally and look at their notes and say, oh yeah, let me add this, let me add that. And we also found that when people do it together, they can, when they revise together, they can recall more. So that's a good study group kind of technique, is to get together, look at your notes, and try to increase your notes, make them more complete. Yeah. Any particular tips for this process? I mean, understandably for the students to do this together, but if you're by yourself doing this as an individual? Yeah, I think just look at your notes, read them, and think. What does this remind me of? What else in the lesson? Well, wait a minute. If they talked about orbit speed for Venus, what didn't they talk about orbit speed for Mercury? They must have. Let me go back and see if I can recall what that was. Yeah, I'm sort of remembering a pattern here that orbit speeds decreased. So, the orbit speed for Mercury must be something larger than 22. So, using your notes that way. And this is also a good time to do other things, during the revision process. You can start to organize things better. Yeah. You can start to bring in your own thoughts and ideas. Boy, I wonder what would happen if a new planet was discovered out beyond Saturn and Neptune. What characteristics would it have based on the characteristics of existing planets that we know of? So yeah, it's a lesson isn't something that just gets poured into your head. Yeah. It's something that you've got to grab onto, take hold of, make your own. So you've got to work with it. You got to be a good thinker. So basically what we're telling students to do here is think. Yes. Which reminds me, even when I was in college, I would use a blue pen for taking notes, but I also had a red pen available, which was my thinking pen. So if a thought arose, oh boy, this reminds me of something I learned in another class. Boy, this reminds me of something that happened to me, at a party last week. I would grab that red pen and start scribbling those notes as well.
Interesting. That's a good point. I can share some personal experience. For a while, I was journaling about all the meetings that I had during the day.
Mm-hmm.
And by the simple fact of reflecting on those meetings and taking time to do so, as you suggest with revising your notes, a lot of ideas and a lot of things came up again, and I remembered more about those meetings. Yeah. And I remembered important follow-ups that I had completely forgotten about. So it's really, I think, important to take time to revise the notes. That is the essential take-home message here.
Yeah, and you used a good word there, reflect. So I'd say yes, reflect, revise.
Yeah.
I take a lot of long walks, and when I do, of course, I have my phone with me.
Yeah.
And I'm always working on some sort of project, and I have a little section in my phone for notes. And so if I have what I think is a good idea, I type some notes, while I'm walking, because I realize I'm not going to remember those later. They're pretty good ideas now, but there's no guarantee I'm going to do that. And the same thing for night. If I wake up at night and I have a good thought, I'll get up and write it on a piece of paper or type it into my phone. So yes, reflecting on things and then capturing those thoughts so that they're not just here today and gone tomorrow.
Yes.
Let me say something else about meetings.
Sure. Yeah, please.
Because I know that's a big interest of yours. A few years back, I was in my office and I got a phone call from an attorney in Texas. And the attorney said, hey, I'm involved in a big case that involves note-taking, and we'd like you to be a consultant on the case and actually testify in the case. Mm-hmm. And I go, well, what is this? And they said, well, I represent a major energy company, and the CEO of that energy company is being indicted by the Securities and Exchange Commission for misleading investors. And I said, wow, what does that have to do with note-taking? And the lawyer said, well, apparently people who have attended some meetings led by the CEO took notes that might be indicative that he was making misleading statements. And I said, oh my gosh. So I got involved. The attorney came and spent about a week with me. We went over all kinds of case information and so forth. And I put together an affidavit showing that note-taking is often incomplete and often wrong, that people miss things. Important things are missing from their notes, as I showed a little while ago with those levels. And I guess the case never quite went to court. It got settled out of court just in the nick of time. Thank goodness I didn't have to go testify. But let me just give you a sense of one of the things that came out, because it relates to meetings. Apparently, and this is just one example of many from this case, apparently the CEO said that he said something to this effect: if recent trends hold true, the site can produce 100 million barrels of oil. But that's not what was in this person's notes. What was in the person's notes was this: the site can produce 100 million barrels of oil.
The essential
very similar, but very different.
Yeah.
And so this is typical. I have many other examples like this, not from the oil industry, but from academic situations where students do exactly this. Yeah. They take a partial note. They write down something and they miss an important aspect, such as the qualifier here, if recent trends hold true. So I think this is one of the things that people need to be aware of, not only in class, but in meetings. How accurate are your notes? Because these two notes are really saying quite different things, even though only one thing was said.
Essentially different things, yeah. The important part is missing in the record, at least.
Yes, it is. Yes.
I want to jump back for just one moment to what you said before, which is the notes that you have on your phone when you go during these walks, or the notes that you take in bed. what system do you have? Because I myself have over 3,500 notes in my phone and voice
Oh my,
and everything, so I scribble down a lot.
yeah.
But is there a system that you have in which you categorize this so that you can actually find things in? Obviously, I have the search function. Luckily, it's a digital device and not a notebook itself. But
Right.
what tips would you have in this regard?
Oh, you will be able to answer that far better than me. This is just primitive. It's just a page, and if a thought occurs to me that I want to write down, I'll write it down. Then I'll come back to my computer and I'll take those notes and put them where I need them. I'm working on this project. I'm writing this introduction. Here's where I need those notes, and I'll include it in a file there. So I don't really keep note records on my phone. They're meant for a certain purpose at that time, and then I'll transfer them to the appropriate computer file.
But then that's probably the important part that I'm missing, which is the revision and the categorization of those notes at a different source. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, because you can write them and then they could easily be lost.
Exactly.
So, you know, my computer desktop has folders and folders within folders, and you know, I'm no organizational saint, but it's certainly helpful. And then of course I can use the search feature on top if I name things with a good name. So I always try to name things in a way that I may want to search for them later, or that I'm likely to find them. But yeah, this is a good topic I wasn't really expecting. And that is, you know, how do we categorize our notes so they're of value later?
Yeah.
You know, a student who's taking Chem 100, obviously you're going to have Chem 100 notes, but hopefully within that Chem 100 folder, you maybe have a subfolder on oxa, I don't even know chemistry, but you know, the different topics that are going on. So, you know, you don't want to just have a chemistry folder with, you know, 2,000 notes in it. You want to organize those notes. And we can talk a little bit about organization at some point. I know that's one of your points.
Yeah. You mentioned cues, which signal important information and provide kind of alerts in our note-taking practice. Could you say a bit more about that?
Sure. I think there's two kinds of cues. One I think we know quite a bit about, and I would call those importance cues. Mm-hmm. So you might be in a lesson and somebody says, all right, listen up, or a coach might say, all right, listen up, or look here, mm-hmm. or all right, this is really important, or hey, this will be on the test, or let me give you a main point here. I remember, and of course, the cues don't just have to be verbal. You know, somebody could point, somebody could pound the desk, somebody could raise an eyebrow, someone could repeat something. They could repeat something because it's really important. So there's all kinds of ways to express importance. And I think students and listeners have to understand what these cues are, so they're on the alert for them. I actually call all of the cues alert words. Yeah. I remember I had a professor, the one who turned me on to educational psychology as an undergraduate student. He was very animated, but I remember like he would put his foot up on the desk. He must have been double jointed, and he'd put his fist here, and he would say something. He'd go, "This is absolutely critical," and he'd, you know, do this and everything. And once we realized he wasn't having a seizure, we knew that he was, you know, expressing some importance, and we knew this was an important time to write something down. When he would give us this thing, he'd jut out his lip and say, "This is absolutely critical." So yeah, that's an importance cue. Yeah. Well, not recently now, but a while back, I studied another kind of cue that I call organizational cues. And here I think the speaker is telling us about the organization of information, and that is really, really important as well. I've got a few examples here. So if someone says, all right, we're going to talk about the atom has 3 parts. As soon as I hear the word parts, I know that atom is the superordinate idea, and I'm now going to hear the 3 parts, so I know what to listen for. One of your questions or points earlier is, I don't know the structure of the information. Sometimes you do. We're
Yeah.
just missing the structure of the information. But as soon as somebody says the atom has 3 parts, I know we have a hierarchical structure, atom on top, and now I'm listening for those 3 parts. So that's an alert word, an organizational cue telling me we have hierarchical information. Let's talk about tennis. Somebody might say, okay, the process of tennis has 4 steps. Well, process is an alert word. It tells us we have a sequence of events. 4 steps is an alert word. It tells us we have a sequence as well. And now I'm listening for those 4 steps. I can take my notes in this form. That's what I call organizational cues. Someone in a psychology class might say the 4 theories can be compared with respect to origin, evidence, and limitations. Now that's going over most students' heads, but what I'm hearing there is we have 4 theories, and all of them have an origin, an evidence, and a limitation. So I can create this matrix structure, this comparative structure for jotting my notes right then and there. And then one last example. The instructor might say the heart has 4 chambers. The right and left atriums are above the right and left ventricles. So now I know I can draw a diagram, an illustration, 4 chambers, and I know where those chambers are located.
Yeah.
So those are all organizational signals. I did a study and I found, I won't explain this in great detail, but I found that some people were given cues and some people weren't given cues during the same exact lesson. And this is what happened to their notes. Those with organizational cues noted 54% of the organization points versus only 15%, and then 80% of the details versus, less than half of that. So these organizational cues were really instrumental in getting students to take more complete notes, yes, but also more organized notes. So yeah, we might think we don't know the structure, but a lot of times the structure is inherent. It's sort of hidden there. But if we listen and look for these cues, we'll find the structure and we can take notes accordingly.
This is also interesting to apply in a marketing and sales pitch and everything. It's equally useful for people to capture message more easily. Yeah. Oh,
absolutely. Anytime we can graphically display something, a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yes.
We can make a much more convincing argument. Yeah. And we have something that's far more memorable than a list of things. Yeah.
Yes. When we're in a meeting and we want to take all these notes and we want to take the organizational cues and want to stay focused, what tips do you have for people to stay both focused at the same time, take these details notes?
Yeah, I'm laughing because I'd have to wonder whether people really want to be on task and taking detailed notes. We call it cyber slacking. And obviously this is something that has gone crazy in the last decade or so. And that is, it's the use of mobile technology, laptops and smartphones. People do not know how to put these things away. And I supervise a course on study skills. And we tell students the horror stories about mobile technology in the classroom and how distracting it is. And we tell them, you are not allowed to do this. You are not allowed to have a smartphone out during class. If you use a laptop, you must use it for class purposes. And then I go in these classes as my teaching assistants teach them, and I go in as an observer, and they don't care that I'm there. The students, they don't, I just kind of sit in the back somewhere. And I watch them sometimes. Yeah. And it is unbelievable how many of them have their cell phones out and are texting, how many of them are switching on their laptops. 1 minute they're on the course material, the next minute they're buying shoes or airline tickets. Yeah. And so people are choosing not to pay attention in situations like that. Here's some of the data. 70 to 90% of college students text during class. Students on average send and receive about 20 texts per class period. We know that texting lowers note-taking by about 13% and achievement by 13%. That's more than a letter grade.
Yeah.
Those with laptops spend 60% of class time using laptops for non-class purposes. Laptop use lowers grades for users and for bystanders.
Yeah,
who
I read that
are,
also in your material. Yeah.
yeah, who are distracted by this.
Yeah.
So how can we do better in meetings? We got to, put the laptops away, put the smartphones away, give people a pad, a paper, and a pen,
Yeah.
and get them involved so that they're more than spectators. Get them to understand the value of taking a good set of notes.
It's very interesting because I've actually researched simplicity. And as part of the research and when I was writing, I actually put my phone away because I kept on having my phone on while I was writing.
Yeah.
And for that post, I forgot which number it was in the series, but it was, I think, the first post of the new year of 2022. And it was my first post that I've written without the distraction of the phone. Now my phone is on the table behind here. I purposely put it away because I want to be present and all my other things are closed down on the computer.
Yeah.
So I'm very guilty of this, and I know what a huge distraction it can be. And what you say that it can be, I mean, just simply not texting can increase your grade with a letter. That's huge.
Yeah. Yeah. I, as a professor, I attend meetings in a program of about 8 faculty, and I attend meetings in a department of about 25 faculty. And so I'm sitting next to people and I'm watching what they're doing on their
Yes.
laptops.
Yes.
They're grading papers, they're sending emails. Why are you even here?
Yeah.
And I agree, meetings can be a huge waste of time. And in some cases, all right, I could see it. But if you really want to be present, if you really want to be involved, that's not the way to do it. I always tell my students, I said, look, if you want to be productive, you're going to have to say no a lot. You're going to have to turn things down.
Focus.
However, when you do something, do it with all your heart and all your mind. Be all in.
Yeah.
And so, I'm seeing my colleagues are not all in.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that too. I see that in meetings, both social and also professional. I mean, it's a huge sucking, I don't know how to say it, but it really sucks our attention tremendously, those mobile phones with all the things and apps that we can do with it nowadays. It's not a good thing, I would say. But
no, and you're right to mention the social part too. It's equally distracting there.
Yes, and distracting, not only distracting, but yeah. Let's talk about SOAR, because this is a method that you've developed for teaching and learning, and I'm quite curious to hear more about it. Obviously, I've read about it, but I'd love to hear it from your mouth. It's an acronym that stands for Select, Organize, Associate, and Regulate. We've talked a little bit about organize. Can you share more about the method?
Sure. Well, let's get a few things out in the open, and that is that by and large, students are pretty poor learners. It's not their fault. They've never really been taught how to learn. We teach students things like math and science and English and history, but we really don't teach them how to learn these things.
Yes.
We focus on the products of learning and not the processes. So it's not students' fault.
Yeah.
But having said that, students make a lot of mistakes. I told you they take incomplete notes. I told you rather than organizing information, they learn in a piecemeal fashion, one idea at a time.
Yeah.
When it comes to studying, they use a lot of rehearsal-like strategies like recopying, rereading, reciting, and those are not powerful techniques. I call those, ridiculous techniques, regurgitative techniques. Students should be doing other things. So students make a whole host of mistakes. So along comes SOAR. SOAR is a method I developed and researched that gets students to do the right things. And it's more than a learning method, it's also a teaching method. Instructors can use this method to instruct students to get them to soar to success. And students should certainly be using this method to soar to success. And it's very simple, just 4 steps. And it's based on some of my research on note-taking and on the graphic organizers we'll get to.
Yeah.
But so the first thing is it's important to select information. If you don't select information, as you know, we're talking, we're selecting out what's important, we're maybe writing that down, we're using it to pose questions and answers. It's important to select information. And as we've said today, it's really important to note that information so it stays with you. It's not gone. You can refer to it later.
Yeah.
So the first aspect of SOAR is selecting. Whether you're reading or whether you're in a lesson or whether you're in a meeting, you better be listening, not being distracted by your mobile technology, and you better be taking good notes.
Yeah.
So that's select. Then comes organize. This does not need to be done during a meeting or during a lesson. This could be done afterwards.
Yeah.
But now you have a complete set of notes. Is there a better organization for it? Were there some alert words, some signals that told you a better way to organize this information?
Yeah.
See, the lesson on planets may come one planet at a time, one fact at a time, but that doesn't mean you need to leave it that way. So what I've created here is a graphic organizer. I've organized the information in this two-dimensional matrix, which allows me to see everything with a glance. A good organizer allows you to see everything and make associations with just a glance. So if we look at this, we can see right away that there's inner planets and there's outer planets. If we look across, we can see as planets go further from the sun, their revolution time increases. Wow, that was 16 facts rolled into one little sentence because I see the relationship, the association. Furthermore, as planets go further from the sun, their orbit speed decreases.
Yeah.
You would never learn this if you study this planet by planet.
Yeah.
You can't. Another thing, real quickly, is if we look at inner planets versus outer planets, inner planets are smaller. Inner planets have rocky surfaces versus the outer planets' slushy surfaces. Inner planets have fewer moons than outer planets, and they have longer rotation times.
Yeah.
Right there, that was 8 times 4. That was 32 pieces of information that students might try to memorize separately that I just put into a nice, neat package because of this organizer. Organizers are super, super powerful for learning information.
Yeah.
So that's the organized part.
Yeah, and that's the part what you should do during this process of revision of the notes.
Yeah, during revision or during review. You know, revision might be a quick and dirty thing to make sure you get more information, but certainly when you're reviewing notes later, this is the kind of thing that definitely should be done. And again, you may be able to do some of this during the lesson if an instructor says, hey, we're going to talk about the planets. There's 8 of them. And for every planet, you know, they have a distance from the sun, they have a surface. So you might anticipate this organization and actually be able to take some of your notes in this form.
Yeah.
A stands for associate. And this is where we build relationships among all these pieces. And this is some of the stuff that I just said, so I won't repeat it again. But these are the associations that you would see. And by the way, if you were to create an outline, and we always advocate to students create outlines, you would never see any of this. This first thing, the further from the sun, the longer the revolution time, the slower the orbit speed. That's 24 bits of information. If it was an outline, that would be on 24 separate lines in the outline versus on these 3 rows together. And then there's other kinds of associations. And this would be an association that we link back to our own knowledge. So I can look at that new information on the planets and say, hey, you know, if I'm a 6th grader, I would be 44 on Mercury instead of, 13 or something. I would be 1 on the planet Jupiter. And when you do this, when you go beyond the information, it helps you understand it better, helps you remember it better. So that's another kind of association.
Yeah.
And then finally, go ahead. Okay. And then finally, we want to regulate. We don't want the teacher to be the first one to test us. That's crazy. We want to test ourselves thoroughly beforehand, so there's nothing the instructor can ask us that we haven't already asked ourselves. So I'm going to generate a set of questions in anticipation of the kind of questions I might have to answer on a test. And so we call that self-regulation.
Mhm.
And self-regulation isn't just about asking yourself questions. I can regulate right now. You know, am I making my point clear in this interview? Am I, as I'm taking notes, are my notes complete enough? Are my notes organized enough? So regulation is something that just should be an ongoing thing in our personal lives and certainly in our academic and learning lives.
Yeah.
So that's SOAR in a nutshell.
Yeah. I want to dive a little bit deeper in the graphic organization, such as the matrices.
Yeah.
We've talked about it, and it makes a whole lot of sense. Is there a way that we can do this in advance, that you say there's always a structure like this, or you always have to look for it by looking for these organizational cues, or is there another way of doing this or of hacking this in some way or another?
Sure. Well, I mean, looking here, an instructor might say, here's what we're going to cover today. And they might leave out all the details.
Mm-hmm.
So they've given you the structure. Now you complete the details within the structure. They might say, hey, you know, we're going to cover 4 inner planets, 4 outer planets. We're going to cover these things. So now you have an understanding of the structure. But of course, that may not be the case. They might just be talking about a planet and talking about its orbit speed. And then you realize, well, maybe that next planet's going to have an orbit speed. So I think the learner looks for these things. Almost everything can end up in a matrix like this. You know, if somebody says, hey, we're going to cover these 4 theories of learning, I'm right away thinking, okay, we've got learning on top, theories of learning. We've got 4, there's my hierarchy coming down. Now they have to start telling me something about these 4 theories. What are they going to tell me? I'm going to listen for that. Oh, they're going to name the theorist. They're going to tell you the date when these theories were derived. They're going to tell you the evidence. They're going to tell you the limitations. So I'm listening for these categories that are going to cut across these different theories.
Yeah.
If I tell you, hey, one of the things I want to talk about in this interview is I want to talk about the dangers of laptop note-taking. Well, right away you might be thinking, okay, he's going to talk about laptop note-taking and it has dangers. Well, is there another kind of note-taking that maybe doesn't have dangers? Yeah, probably longhand note-taking. So I ultimately might be comparing longhand note-taking with laptop note-taking. And you know that simply because I said I want to talk about a certain kind of note-taking called laptop. Now you're going to say, well, what would be the danger? What would make longhand note-taking better than laptop note-taking? Do people take more notes? Do they take better organized notes? Or things missing from their notes? And you can anticipate all this before I even say another word.
Yeah. So it's really looking for the cues in many cases. Yeah. Yeah.
And well, it's being an organizational thinker.
Yeah.
It's being an organizational thinker. You know, you told me one characteristic, I'm expecting another. Or you told me about one theory, I'm expecting another. You told me that this is inherent in this theory, I'm expecting those things to be inherent in the other theory. We don't do a very good job of teaching people to be organizational thinkers.
Yeah.
But see, this is you know, my little system of organizing information. It's really quite simple. Information can be organized into a hierarchy. So when I say there's, you know,
big planets and small planets, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a hierarchy. So that's one kind of structure. Another structure is a sequence. So let's look at the sequence of a tennis serve or the stages of development in a moth or butterfly. Mm-hmm. And then the third big structure is the matrix. But it's interesting, the matrix is derived from a hierarchy. You start with a hierarchy, you have things in the hierarchy, now you want to compare them, you build it into a matrix. You have things in a sequence, you want to compare those steps in a sequence, you just extend it down into a matrix. So the matrix is really the key structure. And then of course there's illustrations for other things when you're looking at the parts of things and how those parts are arranged and so forth. Very simple, 4 structures with the matrix sort of being the cornerstone.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can expand it and we can add rows and columns. Yeah.
Yeah, like here's what I kind of mentioned before, the laptop versus longhand.
Yeah.
And we can compare the two.
Yeah.
And I'll just go through this quickly and then I'll talk about what you just said, extending it. Both do pretty good job in terms of getting students to record idea units,
Yeah.
lesson ideas, both again about 30% though, not so good. Longhand note takers use fewer words to capture an idea, so they're a little more efficient. Maybe not a big deal. This is really important. When laptop note takers take notes, they tend to write things down in a verbatim way.
Yeah.
Another way of saying verbatim is mindless. They're not really thinking. And this is what my statistics professor was worried about all those years ago at Florida State University, that you'd have all these mindless note takers. So what if you're not doing it verbatim, what are you doing? You're doing paraphrases. And paraphrases means you're putting your own thoughts and ideas in there. You're interpreting. And that's a much deeper, more meaningful way to process information than just taking notes verbatim. So this is good. This is a big advantage for longhand. And then graphic images. I've shown a lot of graphic images in this interview.
Yeah.
Well, if you're on a laptop, it might be hard to capture those. If you have a pencil and paper, you can easily sketch out a graph or a chart or something like that. And so in the study we did, the laptop people recorded no graphic images, whereas the longhand note takers did.
Yeah.
So, even if somebody gave me this matrix and then I come to find out, oh, there was also an achievement test, and the laptop note takers did a whole letter grade worse than the longhand note takers, did about 10% worse on a test, I can just add another row here to this graphic organizer.
Yeah. And also simply making connections. You can just draw a line and 2 circles and that's it. That's something that you really cannot do when taking notes digitally.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yes, exactly. I mean, you sort of can a little bit, like with bolding and italics and so on. But yeah,
it becomes.
I agree. When I make notes, I'm drawing lines here, I'm scribbling here, and so forth. I'm putting in all kinds of symbols that will help me interpret those notes later.
Yeah.
And now.
Yeah. And even like you said, with 2 colors of pens for the note taking and the thinking, that's also good. Yeah.
Yeah.
The note-taking process during a lecture is very different than note-taking, for instance, during a meeting or when researching material or reading a book, or reading books or studying something. Yeah. Could you say more about this latter process, this process of research and a possible structure for this type of note-taking?
Yeah, can you see that a little bit?
Yes.
Okay. I just put it in there because it's a little bigger than the slide I have.
Yeah.
When in a lesson, you really got to strap it on because a lesson is fleeting. I told you 180 words a minute is a car race.
Yeah.
And so you really got to be ready to jot down a lot, to realize you've missed things, to go back and revise and so forth. It's really a difficult task. You're trying to listen, you're trying to write. My instructor really was into something, realizing that this is a difficult task we're giving to students or people in a meeting. A text is completely different. It's like an old dog in a sunbeam. It ain't going anywhere. We have all the time we need to process the information.
Yeah.
What we're looking for, though, is exactly the same of what we would be looking for in a lecture. So I've got a little passage here on 3 types of memory structures, and I can move this up a little. Well, let me just change my box a little bit, actually. This is the list.
Yeah.
This guy out of here. All right, now we get it. So, so we're reading this and we go, okay, it's on memory. And then right away, it's the psychologists believe 3 different types of memory. So I'm thinking, we got memory on top and we have the 3 types. So I want to listen for the 3 types. Those are the topics of this passage, this text. So then it starts, it tells us the 3 names. And so in the first paragraph, they're talking about sensory. So I'm already anticipating that they're going to talk about the other two types, short-term and long-term, in the next two paragraphs. Then it says sensory has a large capacity. I have to be an organizational thinker, and I'm saying, okay, what is the author telling me about? The author is telling me about the capacity, the size, and the detail. The detail that they're telling me about capacity is it's large. So look what I do here. I put a box around sensory because it's a topic. I put a circle around capacity because it's a category. And I underline large because it's the detail that fits with the capacity of sensory memory. It holds the sight, sounds, and other sensations in the environment. Okay, good. I'm not going to select that out. It holds all these things for just a second or so. What is the author talking about here? They're not just talking about a second or so. They're telling me about something called duration. But notice this time the author doesn't use the word duration. The author could have, should have, but didn't. So I'm going to add that word as a category. I'm going to put it out the side, duration, and I'm going to circle it, and I'm going to underline a second or so because that's the duration. And then just going on, while your attention is focused on the pitcher at a ball game, all the other sensations, crowd noise, blah, 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 are briefly recorded in your sensory memory. That's an example. Examples are really crucial to learning, so I'm going to underline that example. Then they get into forgetting. And what's the theory here about what gets forgotten? All the information, so forget all. And now I've got a structure. Now when I go to short-term memory, I'm anticipating they're going to talk about capacity, they're going to talk about duration, they're going to talk about forgetting, they're going to talk about example, maybe they'll talk about some new stuff, I don't know, but at least I'm looking for those things, and I'm going to do that again when I come to long-term memory. So, what some people do is they just read, and then they reread, and then they reread, and that ain't going to work. Some people highlight, and some of this could be captured with highlighting, but I prefer a pen, because with a pen, I can write stuff and do stuff in the margins like you see here. This is basically a lot of the same SOAR techniques, but I'm doing it as on a text, and I've really got, a world of time to do it, unlike with a lesson.
And you're creating categories which make it easier later to come back to, because instantly, okay, this is a duration, this is an example. Makes it quick to come back to.
Yeah, exactly.
And you always use the squares and the circles and the underlinement. So this is kind of your.
Well, yes, that's my system. And it's when I see a topic. This is a sort of a contrived example, but whenever I see a topic, if we're talking about 4 theories of learning, that might be over 10 pages. The topics are going to get boxes, and the categories are going to get circles, and the details are going to get underlined. And then anything else, I'm just writing in the margin.
This is useful. Last question, Kenneth.
All right.
And thanks so much, because I've been definitely picking up on some new skills with regard to note-taking, and even just learning as a bigger topic. What question about note-taking didn't I ask in this obviously short interview, which I should have asked? Is there some angle that I missed?
Wow, I don't think so. I really think we've covered a lot. We've learned, how to be better note takers. We've learned the problem of how difficult it is and why it's difficult. And then we expanded note taking into SOAR, which got us into graphic organizers and so forth. We've definitely covered a lot of grounds, that you have to have a disposition, you have to have an attitude, a bulldog attitude. I'm going in here and I'm going in here to learn. And part of that learning is going to be taking a good set of notes. So I'm going to put that phone away. I'm going to put that laptop away. We even touched on the fact that, it's not students' fault. It's not the fault of people in meetings, because we've not done a good job of teaching people how to learn. That's why we offer a study skills class, even at the college level. We offer 19 sections of this class a year, and it's enrolled by over 600 students. So it's never too late to learn good learning strategies, good learning techniques. And then the only other thing I could think of is, I think, this isn't just a student issue. This is an instructor issue.
Yeah.
Instructors need to understand the importance and value of note-taking and how they can help students take notes. A lot of my research is on that very aspect. What can instructors do in class to improve the note-taking process? What can they do to teach in a way that's compatible with SOAR so that students, are soaring to success, whether they ever intend to or not?
Yeah.
And then ultimately, I think our goal in education shouldn't be just to be a good teacher and help students learn. It should be to teach them how to learn, teach them how to take good notes, teach them how to use graphic organizers, teach them how to self-regulate, etc.
Yeah. Hey, appreciate it, Kenneth. It was, it was educational. I enjoyed it. And I look forward to revising and reviewing the recording and to writing about it.
Well, good, very good.
I'll be sending you the links when it's ready.
Good. Well, I hope the audience enjoyed it and got some value from it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for inviting me and for having me. I enjoyed doing it.
And thank you for taking part.
Okay.
We'll be in touch. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye, Kenneth. Bye.
Bye-bye.